Howdy neighbors, Christopher Henry here with you on the old time Noya Mountain Music YouTube channel. I want to rap with you a little bit about what I've been up to. A lot of times I don't talk too much about what I've been doing in my own, musical life on this channel. Let's head right into the teaching. But I want to share some stuff about this adventure that I went on with the great Shawn Camp. So some of y'all might know who he is. In the bluegrass world, he's very well known for being the guitar player and amazing lead singer in the Earls of Leicester, the Flatt & Scruggs tribute band that's headed up by Jerry Douglas. But he's an amazing singer and songwriter, and we worked a lot together in Nashville when I was living there 10-15 years ago. But we hadn't played a gig in a long time. I've been playing with Peter Rowan. He's been doing the Earls of Leicester, maybe not so much of his original music. But he got a gig at the Museum of the Appalachians, and this was just this last Saturday. So before I get to be rambling too much, I do want to just say this is all going to circle back around and tie together about talking about tone and expanding your toolbox to be able to be heard in loud jam sessions and potentially on stage. So back to the Shawn Camp adventure. He booked another gig around Leaper's Fork in Nashville at this place called the Fox and Lock, and that was a lot of fun. And I also booked a recording session where we recorded 12 or 13 of his original songs centering around the saga of Sis Draper. These really cool songs that he wrote with Guy Clark. And so he sent us a whole lot of material to prepare, and I wasn't especially in practice. I'd been at the Fish Festival dancing for about 4 nights, and I hadn't played much mandolin, a few lessons here and there. But so when I was getting into the studio, I was a little bit cold, and it took me a little while to warm up and get the mandolin in tune, get a new set of strings on there, get the strings to settle in, all that kind of stuff. Borrow a tuner, which I didn't bring to the session, make sure you always have a tuner. But everything worked out beautifully. Shawn was cutting his vocals live. And it was more of a fiddle-based album, but I was playing, rhythm, and one of the challenges in those kind of situations is where you're going to put your mandolin chop, okay? So people feel the chop different ways. You can kind of put it in the middle, you can kind of drive things and have it leaning on the front edge. A lot of times that's where I like to be, or you can kind of drop it back in the pocket and really not move. And that's kind of where you might hear folks like Ronnie McCurry, Monroe sometimes was on the back of the pocket there, just making sure that it wasn't moving forward. And so that way, the rhythm guitar can surge up a little bit, and it gives it a little bit of breath, but it's not moving, it's not leaning forward and just getting faster the whole way. So these are some of the interesting dynamics that I have challenges with in different times, just adapting to different situations, and some of the stuff that we're all going to encounter, different rhythm sections, people feeling the beat different ways, various levels of places people are in their consciousness that might cause them to rush or slow down a little bit. But everything turned out beautifully. We got 12 or 13 songs recorded and then played a couple gigs the next 2 nights. And where this is all leading is to talk about tone and energy, okay? So we've probably a lot of us have been in a jam session where there's Martin D28s and a banjo or 2 master tones in there, and there's a lot of volume. And it can be challenging to get our mandolin to have enough volume to cut through all that kind of stuff. And because I grew up with my dad, the amazing Red Henry, who is, to me, the most intense mandolin player of all time. He kind of took the Bill Monroe thing of intensity and be like, yeah, I'm going to do that, and took it to some new levels. David McLaughlin one time described Red as being like Bill Monroe on and then his mandolin was like Bill Monroe's mandolin on steroids. And so this was a sound that left a big impression on me, and I wanted to learn how to do that. I was definitely into the idea of being able to generate a lot of volume and to be able to participate with the energy, so when you get all this other stuff happening around you, the mandolin can rise up and penetrate above all that kind of stuff. But, this can work for you and against you. And also depending on what kind of sound system you might be playing through, what kind of monitor situation you're going to be having there, who's operating the sound system, all these kind of factors are going to be different variables that can work for you or against you. We had somebody really one of the best in the business, Kurt Story, who was running sound for us. So we had a good sound check in there. But again, you're doing your sound check when there's nobody in the room. This is like a restaurant bar that had a stage. So by the time we were playing the music, there was a bunch of people in there, and not only do they soak up some of the sound, which is going to change the overall acoustics of the room, but they're in there, they're talking, they're eating, and so the overall volume of the room was a lot higher, and so we're not going to be able to necessarily hear ourselves as well as we were before all those people got in there. So back to this energy thing. Shawn Camp is one of the most dynamic musicians on the planet, and he can go from a whisper to a roar in a split second. And so one of the things I like to do is to try to follow that energy. So if he's getting real soft, I'm going to come down. And he's getting real loud, I want to get up there with him, and push into it, to drive into it, because a lot of it's an energy thing. And so, but you got to realize that the tone of your mandolin isn't going to be always the best if you're just banging on it as hard as you possibly can. You might have tried that. Sometimes the tone of the chop will thin out. So if you're chopping at a more moderate or polite volume, you might hear some of those low tones. But if you're banging on it hard, it might sound a little irritating to the ear, but it will penetrate and it'll cut through there. And sometimes you just kind of get carried away with the flow of the energy, and you're going to be banging on your mandolin, which can put it out of tune and all kinds of stuff. You don't want to be tuning too much on stage because that can be distracting. Like if you watch Flat and Scruggs, no one's ever tuning their instruments. It's all smooth, and that's something that was not accepted on their stage show. That's something to consider. Sometimes if someone's like, taking too long to tune the mandolin or whatever it is, that can interrupt the flow of the show if the song's already been introduced or something like that. So I know I'm kind of all over the place, but these are some of the challenges that we all go through. These are some of the gates through which we all pass as bluegrass musicians or mandolin players. But my point is that one of the things that I enjoy doing, and that some people that might potentially want to hire me could potentially appreciate, is my ability to go up to those energy levels and to be able to penetrate and get that musical energy to move through the microphone or through the band, whatever it is. Sometimes when you're playing as hard as you possibly can, it can be very exciting. Sometimes it's a little bit too much. Sometimes you might be getting so excited, and this is what happened because I'm not super in practice playing on stage. Peter, has maybe half a dozen, 10 gigs a year, and I might fill in with Wyatt Ellis here and there, but I'm mostly sitting on the couch teaching. And so I'm not really in practice like I used to be when I was more like a road dog, with my own band and all that kind of stuff, years and years ago. And so your ability to be really precise with how you're placing your notes within the band can be potentially problematic if you're not really in practice. If you're just trying to kind of hang on, especially at faster tempos, all that kind of stuff. So, when I was getting on stage with Shawn, especially the second night at the Museum of the Appalachians, I noticed myself rushing a little bit when I watched the video back. But when I was playing, it was feeling pretty good. Some of the time I was just like kind of hanging on by the skin of my teeth. But when I listened back to the video, I was noticing that my mandolin lead was, like if the band was playing here, it was kind of way up here. Sometimes it's nice to be a little bit ahead of the beat. You'll hear that with a lot of the great, lead musicians, Bill Monroe and Earl Scruggs. They'd ride a few milliseconds, 15, 20 milliseconds ahead of the beat, and then they kind of tuck it back in, different times to sync the band all together, because you just don't want it to be running away the whole time. And it can be an important thing of the band to be able to move a little bit and breathe, but not necessarily catch up with the person who's playing the lead, because then they'll just want to go higher because that's how they want to feel the rhythm. These are some of the subtle dynamics of playing in a band that you might have had experience with. But what I really want to talk about here today is the tone thing. So when we're sitting on the couch and we're just practicing by ourselves, or playing a little Coming Around the Mountain, stuff like that, you might be tilting your pick one way or the other, getting some good fat tone. But when you get to the jam session, and you get the Martin guitars and the master tone banjos, you might not be able to be heard. So it can be important in those situations to have another gear that you can get into. But you don't necessarily want to just break out that gear unless it's well oiled in your practice routine. So what I want to encourage y'all to do is to feel into doing some of your grunt work, your practice exercises, your folded scales and whatnot, not just at a regular kind of polite volume level, but to be able to dig in and to play that stuff, find the threshold, like play it as absolutely hard as you can. You know, that might throw your mandolin right out of tune. But then to find out what that threshold is, that's unacceptable, and back it off just a little bit from there. So by the time you get in the jam session that's loud, you're going to be able to cut. And so what's happening there is I'm basically playing as hard as I can, and I'm gripping the pick very tightly. Okay, so you can play hard without holding the pick tightly, but when you do hold the pick tightly, you can get even more penetration and cut to punch through everything else that's going on. So I got this decibel meter here, and I was curious to kind of break it out and see, like, technically how loud we're playing here. So I'm going to try this 317 ride that some of y'all might have seen on the YouTube channel here at a reasonable, polite volume and see what it says on the decibel meter. Alright, so that's clocking in at 91.9 decibels. Alright, so if I'm going to play kind of as hard as I can, let's see what happens then. So it's already up to 101 decibels. And so within the sound reinforcement field, some of y'all might know that when you're trying to get something like, I can't remember exactly how it works, it's either 1 or 2 decibels louder, you need twice as much power. And we're talking about electricity. But when something's going from 91 decibels to 101 decibels, that's a significant amount of volume that's going to allow you to cut through what's going on around you, whether it's a loud jam session or if you're on stage. And I do want to say that you don't probably want to be a one-trick pony. I remember one of the criticisms I got when I was a whippersnapper, you know, one of my favorite heroes before a show, he said, all right, go play loud and fast, like that was all I did. And that kind of hurt my feelings, and, you know, maybe I was a little bit too sensitive, and maybe it was a thing that, you know, maybe didn't have to be said or whatever. But it allowed me to realize that if that was the impression I was giving, that it was kind of a little bit like a one-trick pony, that I was just playing loud and fast all the time. So one of the things I've learned through playing with Shawn and Peter Rowan is to be able to really lean into the softer dynamics, but also then when it's time to really kind of penetrate and move that volume, you want to be able to do that too. So what I'm saying is the invitation could be to take some of your internal repertoire, say the old Coming Around the Mountain, whatever, it could be your fiddle tunes, you know, the old Joe Clark, and just play it as hard as you can. And that might not be the tone that ultimately you would desire the most, but what is more important? Being able to get big, fat, deep, perhaps, you know, subjectively pleasingly dark tone and to not be heard, or to be able to generate more volume and more penetration and more cut through what's going on around you. This maple bridge I've got here helps me do that because it's a resonant wood, like they make mandolins and fiddles and basses with. If you have an ebony bridge, which is standard of course, it's not going to transmit the vibrations as quickly to the top, and they're not going to punch out as much. Of course, there's not necessarily one best bridge for every single mandolin, but I have found for what my needs are, a lot of times I prefer the maple bridge. You can Google the Red Henry maple bridge and find out more about that. You can make your own if you have some rudimentary woodworking skills and tools, but this is one way that I'm able to generate more volume and projection with my mandolin, and it really focuses the sound. So if you're way far away from the mandolin, you're going to get more of the sound. So I hope this might be a little bit of a window for you to think about, okay, when I'm at the house and I'm just practicing my scales, maybe lean into them, see how hard you can possibly play. You're like, okay, that's a little bit too much, back it down a little bit. And then also, sometimes with bluegrass music, you know, you just want to have that bite, you know, which wouldn't, necessarily be better than. So the idea is that I want to encourage all of y'all to just experiment with your projection and tone ceiling, expanding your dynamic range so you have that practiced on your couch so you can break it out in the toolbox, in the jam session, or on stage when you need it. All right. So, if you like the channel, please think about liking the video and subscribing to the channel, putting the bell notifications on. And if you want to support the channel, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com. And a big thanks and howdy to all the folks who have been helping us make these videos, and we will catch you on the next one.